Ladies and gentlemen, have you ever wondered why the stories of history, especially those told about ancient civilizations, sound so majestic in textbooks, but would probably lull you to sleep if you were to truly live through them? Let us journey together tonight into the dusty corridors of the past, into a world so far removed from our modern conveniences that the very thought of surviving there might keep you awake with discomfort, or perhaps lull you gently into slumber with the sheer monotony of it all. So let's drift back to ancient Egypt, that land of golden pyramids and mighty pharaohs, but with the reality stripped bare, not the glorified version written in ink and stone. Because, truth be told, you wouldn't last a single day in ancient Egypt, and by the end of this long reflection, perhaps the dullness of such history will make your eyelids heavy, just as monotonous chanting by temple priests must have done for weary villagers long ago. Now, imagine waking up not in your soft mattress, not in a house with walls that keep out the heat, not in a space filled with the hum of fans or air conditioners. Instead, you rise with the first rays of the sun, your body stiff from lying on a reed mat or a wooden bed without much cushion. The Nile River is nearby, its waters the lifeline of your entire community, and yet the smell that greets your nose is not perfume, not coffee, not toast from a kitchen, but the scent of mud, fish, and animals gathered near its banks. For water, you must carry clay jars heavy on your shoulders, walking barefoot on sand that burns under the sun. There is no fresh, filtered glass of water waiting at your bedside. And if you should think of bathing, remember, soap has not yet been invented as you know it. Instead, you rely on oils and scrubbing sand. Every step of life requires effort, and already by sunrise, you are exhausted. Breakfast is not cereal or bread soft from a bakery, but perhaps a chunk of coarse bread baked from emmer wheat, so hard that sometimes your teeth may crack trying to chew it. Archaeologists who studied ancient skeletons often found worn down teeth because sand and stone would grind into the flour during milling. Imagine chewing bread filled with grit, knowing your dentist is thousands of years away in the future. Add to that a sip of beer, not the refreshing golden drink you picture today, but a thick porridge like liquid made for the peasants. Yes, you start your day with a beer that tastes closer to soggy bread than anything delightful. Welcome to Egypt, where every meal is a reminder of survival rather than satisfaction. Your work is relentless, and that is perhaps the part of history that is not glamorous. You see the pyramids in pictures and marvel at the grandeur, but you do not see the thousands of ordinary men sweating under the sun, hauling massive stones, their backs bent and muscles torn, their skin burned dark by the desert heat. Some die young, crushed by accidents or weakened by exhaustion. The glorified monuments we admire today are built on endless toil, and if you were part of that society, chances are you would be among them. Even if you were not building pyramids, perhaps you are farming, and farming in Egypt means depending wholly on the flooding of the Nile. Too much water, your crops are gone. Too little water, famine follows. There are no irrigation machines, no modern pumps, no weather forecasts to guide you. Your entire existence depends on the mercy of a river that does not care for your survival. The clothing is simple, linen wrapped around the body, no buttons, no zippers, nothing fitted to your liking. You wear the same thing every day, washed in river water, beaten on stones, and dried under the hot sun. If you think fashion trends are exhausting now, imagine living in a place where your choices are none at all. Your skin is smeared with oils to protect it from drying out, but insects swarm constantly, and hygiene is a daily battle you never truly win. There are no perfumes to mask the smell of sweat, no deodorant, no showers. What you call daily freshness is, in this world, an unimaginable luxury. And then comes the reality of medicine. In our age, a small cut may sting but can be cleaned easily. In ancient Egypt, even a scratch could fester, grow infected, and end your life. They had doctors, yes, but their remedies were mixtures of honey, herbs, and sometimes incantations to ward off spirits. Surgery, unthinkable. Anesthesia, non-existent. If you had a toothache, they might pack it with herbs or drill it, But without the relief of modern medicine, pain was your constant companion. Can you imagine the restless nights, lying on a straw bed, listening to the buzzing of insects, your jaw throbbing with no hope of relief? That is the kind of history that does not make it into bedtime stories, but it is what life truly was. Let us speak of religion, for in Egypt, it controlled every moment. You think of grand temples and gods with the heads of animals, but for the people, this meant endless rituals and fears. Every sunrise was not just another day, it was a prayer that Ra, the sun god, would rise again. Every death was not just loss, but a complicated journey into the afterlife, requiring elaborate mummification, rituals, and spells. You lived in fear of angering the gods, of curses, of failing to perform the right offerings. Imagine a life where even a simple mistake in ritual could make you believe your soul was in jeopardy. Freedom of thought was not celebrated, obedience was the law. Now consider social structure. You admire the pharaohs, their golden masks, their treasures. But you, unless you were born into the ruling class, you were at the very bottom, a farmer, a servant, or a laborer. Social mobility was nearly impossible. If your father was a farmer, you too would farm. If your father carved stone, you would carve stone. Your life was already decided before you were old enough to speak. Dreams of becoming more, of traveling freely, of changing your destiny, these were not dreams you dared to dream. You worked, you survived, and you obeyed. That was life. And still, as night fell, the comforts of modern evenings were absent. There were no glowing lights, no television, no music played from a device. Instead, the night was filled with darkness pierced only by the dim flame of oil lamps. The air was hot, thick, and filled with the hum of insects. Your family sat on the floor, eating lentils, onions, and bread, the same meal repeated endlessly. Perhaps you told stories, or listened to elders recount tales of gods and kings, but when the silence returned, you lay down on your mat, staring into the dark, your stomach growling, your body aching, your mind exhausted. The stars shone above Egypt, yes, but for you, they were distant reminders of how small and powerless your life truly was. And so, ladies and gentlemen, when people today speak with longing of the majesty of ancient Egypt, they imagine golden beauty, but not the back-breaking labor, the hunger, the sickness, the stench, the endless repetition of survival. It was a world where death was common, where children often did not live past infancy, where mothers died in childbirth, where famine swept through villages, where armies conquered and slaves were taken. This is not the Egypt you see in glossy pictures or documentaries filled with music and color. This is the Egypt that would break you, exhaust you, bore you into submission with its sameness, or frighten you with its brutality. But perhaps the most striking thing is this: despite all the hardship, they lived as best they could, prayed as they were told, worked until their bodies gave out, and built monuments that lasted thousands of years. You, with your air conditioning, your medicine, your comforts, your choices, may not last a single day in their shoes, and yet they lasted generations, long enough to etch their names into history. Their lives may seem boring, monotonous, or unbearable, but they endured. And so, when you close your eyes tonight, perhaps you will drift to sleep imagining yourself in a mud brick home along the Nile, the air heavy with heat, the sound of insects buzzing, your body aching from the day's labor, your mind heavy with ritual and duty, until the dark silence of history lulls you into slumber. If you close your eyes and let your mind wander further, imagine the sun rising over the horizon of the Nile once again, painting the river in gold. For us, the sight would be breathtaking, a picture to capture with a camera, but for them, it was simply the start of another day of labor. The roosters crow, goats bleat, and children cry out in hunger, and there is no choice but to rise from your mat and begin the routines that never change. There is no weekend, no rest day, no time to sleep in. Every moment belongs to the cycle of survival. You fetch water, grind grain, prepare food, tend to animals, and walk fields under the relentless sun. Imagine doing this not for one day, not for a week, but for your entire lifetime. Day after day, season after season, your tasks remain the same, and if you ask yourself whether you could endure that monotony, the answer might already weigh on you like the desert heat. When you picture ancient Egypt, perhaps you think of music and entertainment, yet even these were not what you might imagine. Music was made with simple flutes, harps, and drums, but most people did not sit for concerts. Music accompanied rituals, work, or celebration, but there was little time for leisure. Games for children included throwing sticks or playing with carved figurines, but these were fleeting distractions. The majority of life was spent in labor, with joy found only in moments snatched away from toil. Even weddings, rather than grand ceremonies, were practical unions, often arranged, focused less on romance and more on survival. Imagine living your life without ever being asked what you truly wanted, who you wished to love, or what dreams you carried. Instead, you followed paths carved out by custom, family, and necessity. The weight of such existence would settle into your bones long before old age ever arrived. If you imagine yourself as one of the wealthier citizens, the life may seem brighter, but let us not deceive ourselves. The nobles had finer linen, more spacious homes, perhaps servants and better food, but they too lived in fear of disease, in fear of displeasing the gods, in fear of losing favor with the pharaoh. Their bodies were carried to lavish tombs, yes, but their lives still ended with the same breathless silence that claimed the farmer in the field. A scorpion's sting could take down a noble as easily as it could a peasant. A fever could sweep through a palace just as quickly as through a village. And while treasures glistened in tombs, the life lived above ground was still hard, fragile, and uncertain. Think now of the work required to build what we so admire today. The pyramids, the temples, the obelisks. The textbooks call it engineering genius, and indeed it was. But imagine standing there with your bare hands, with ropes made of papyrus, with wooden sleds dragging blocks of stone that weighed tons, men lined up by the hundreds, pulling in rhythm under the burning sun, while overseers shouted, whips cracked, and sweat drenched every body. You are not given a choice, you do the work, or you suffer the lash. The food given is little more than bread and beer, just enough to keep you going, never enough to satisfy. At night, you collapse on the sand or in simple huts, your body bruised, your muscles torn, only to rise again with the morning light and continue. The grandeur we see now in museums and monuments was bought with the pain of thousands, with lifetimes spent in labor for someone else's glory. And if you think, perhaps I would escape such fate by living as a priest or scribe, let us imagine that too. To be a scribe, you must spend years hunched over papyrus, learning the complicated system of hieroglyphs, hundreds of symbols that must be memorized and drawn with precision. Your back aches from bending, your fingers cramp from holding reed pens, and your eyes strain in the dim light. You copy text not of your choosing, but of religious rituals, official decrees, and endless lists of grain, cattle, and taxes. Day after day, line after line, symbol after symbol. To be a priest, you spend your life in ritual purity, shaving your head, bathing constantly in cold water, chanting the same prayers at the same times. You slaughter animals for offerings, tend to statues of gods, and repeat rites designed to maintain cosmic order. There is no freedom of thought, no room for questioning, no space for individuality. You live inside the rhythm of religion, a rhythm that never changes until it becomes the very air you breathe. To modern minds, this would feel like being trapped in an endless cycle of repetition, and perhaps boredom would weigh heavier than the labor itself. The weather, too, in all its extremes, would make survival difficult. In the daytime, the sun scorches the earth, baking the sand, drying the skin, burning the body until sweat runs into your eyes and stings. At night, the desert cools sharply, the air cold against bare skin, leaving you shivering on your thin mat. There are no thick blankets, no insulated walls, no comforting heater or fan to balance the extremes. You live at the mercy of nature, exposed and vulnerable. Sandstorms rise suddenly, filling the air with choking dust, blinding eyes, and coating every surface. The Nile's flood, when it comes, can destroy homes as easily as it nourishes crops. There is no insurance, no safety net, no government assistance waiting to help rebuild your life. You rebuild with your hands, or you do not rebuild at all. Let us not forget the punishments for crime or disobedience. For law in Egypt was harsh and swift. A thief might lose a hand, a liar might face lashes, and a traitor could be executed without hesitation. The law was not blind, but tilted in favor of the powerful. Justice was often simply whatever the authorities declared it to be. Imagine living your life where a simple accusation could ruin you, where a word against the wrong person could cost your freedom or your life. You walk carefully, you speak carefully, and you think carefully, always guarding yourself. There is no freedom of expression, no protest, no argument. You bow to power, or power crushes you. And yet, amid this life, there are small sparks of beauty. The Nile in the early morning, cool mist rising above its surface, fishermen casting their nets with practiced hands, birds flying in graceful arcs. Children laugh as they chase one another, even barefoot in the dust. Women sing as they grind grain, their voices rising together in rhythm with the work. Even in hardship, humans find ways to smile, to hope, to create. A farmer might carve a small wooden figure of a cat for his child, or a scribe might add a playful sketch in the corner of a papyrus. Love blossoms even in arranged marriages, friendships form in the fields, laughter breaks through the monotony of endless days. And yet the truth remains, such joys are fleeting, small candles in a vast desert of labor and struggle. If you imagine death, as all must in such a world, the picture is equally heavy. To die in Egypt was not a quiet thing, it was a process. The body had to be prepared, organs removed, dried with natron salts, wrapped in linen. Also the soul could journey into the afterlife. But for most people, there was no grand mummification, no golden mask, no richly painted tomb. Instead, they were buried in shallow graves, wrapped in simple mats, returned to the earth with little more than a prayer. The afterlife was promised, yes, but only if the gods were kind, only if the rituals were done properly, only if the heart was judged pure. Imagine the anxiety, the constant thought that perhaps you had not done enough. Perhaps you had offended a god. Perhaps your soul would not reach paradise, but be devoured in darkness. This fear lingered in every mind, from the palace to the village hut. We must also remember the constant presence of war. Borders were threatened, enemies lurked, and armies marched. Young men were taken to fight in distant lands, leaving families behind, often never to return. Battles were fought with bronze weapons, shields and chariots, brutal and bloody. Those who returned brought scars, both visible and invisible. And for those at home, war meant higher taxes, greater demands, and fewer hands to work the fields. The stability of Egypt was not as eternal as the monuments suggest. Dynasties fell, rulers changed, and common people paid the price. Think of children, too, born into this world not by choice but by the natural rhythm of life. Many did not live past infancy. Disease, malnutrition, accidents, all took their toll. Mothers wept, fathers hardened their hearts, siblings grew used to loss. Childhood was not a time of play and learning, but of labor from an early age. A boy might herd goats at 5, a girl might carry water at 6. Education was rare, limited to those destined to be scribes. Most children grew into the same work their parents did, their dreams confined to survival. And yet, they laughed, they played when they could, they found joy in the smallest of things. But their lives were short, their innocence brief, their burdens heavy. As you lie here now, perhaps in a comfortable chair, perhaps in a room cooled by fans, lit by electricity, filled with comforts unimagined by the ancients, imagine trading it all for one day in their sandals. Imagine waking to a world without your soft mattress, without your morning coffee, without your phone or books or music. Imagine walking barefoot on hot sand, carrying heavy jars of water, eating coarse bread that grinds your teeth, working under a blazing sun until your body aches, returning to a hut filled with smoke, insects, and noise, with no relief but the dark. Imagine falling asleep to the sound of jackals howling in the distance, the fear of sickness lingering in your mind, and the weight of tomorrow pressing down before today has even ended. This is the Egypt that waits behind the monuments, the reality buried beneath the gold and stone. And it is here, in this endless monotony and struggle, that history truly lived. If you let yourself drift deeper into that ancient world, imagine the mornings not just once, but repeated endlessly, the same tasks falling into place like beads on a string, each indistinguishable from the other. You rise again with the sound of animals stirring, the faint light of the horizon, and the unchanging duties. There is a comfort perhaps in the predictability, yet also a suffocating sameness that would weigh heavily on anyone used to the shifting variety of our modern age. You do not choose breakfast. You do not decide your schedule. You do not plan your future. The same bread, the same beer, the same labor, the same prayers. Over and over, until one day you simply do not rise anymore. Consider childbirth, a moment we today associate with hospitals, sterile rooms, doctors and nurses, pain eased by medicine, fear softened by the promise of safety. In Egypt, a woman gives birth on a mat laid on the ground, surrounded by other women, perhaps a midwife with herbs and prayers, but no tools of precision, no assurance. Many women do not survive, and many infants do not draw more than a few breaths. The act of bringing life is shadowed by the constant presence of death. Families grieve often, and grief becomes a rhythm of existence. Imagine the toll this would take on the heart to love a child only briefly, to lose them, and to rise again tomorrow, because there is no pause in the cycle of survival. Festivals existed, moments of music, dance, processions of gods carried through streets, people rejoicing with food and drink. Yet even these festivals were not wholly joyful, but heavy with ritual. Offerings must be made correctly. Hymns must be sung in precise order. Dances must follow tradition. Joy was structured, bounded by religion, and though laughter filled the air, it was never free from the shadow of duty. Even pleasure was tied to fear, fear of angering gods if the ritual went astray, fear of missing an offering and losing divine favor. Imagine celebrating always with the thought that a misstep could mean punishment beyond this life. Slavery was also a constant presence, though not always as imagined. Some were prisoners of war, some forced into labor, some bound by debt. They worked alongside peasants, often indistinguishable in hardship, their lives reduced to service with no hope of freedom. Imagine the despair of waking each day knowing you belong not even to yourself, but to another's will. Your labor is theirs, your body is theirs, your life is theirs. You cannot choose to rest. You cannot choose to speak freely. You cannot choose to walk away. Chains need not always be iron. Sometimes chains are invisible, yet heavier than stone. And then there is the Nile itself, giver of life, taker of life. It floods, it recedes, it nourishes, it destroys. Children splash in it, fishermen cast nets, women wash clothes, men ferry goods, but lurking in its waters are dangers, hippos that crush boats, crocodiles that lurk beneath the surface, disease carried by its flow. Imagine standing at the edge, filling jars of water, knowing that at any moment something beneath could take you. Yet you return daily, because without it there is no bread, no beer, no survival. The river is both friend and enemy, and you cannot live without it. Night in Egypt is another rhythm. The oil lamps flicker faintly, their smoke staining walls, the smell of burning fat or resin lingering. Families huddle together, the air thick and hot, mosquitoes buzzing around, children crying softly in the dark. Outside, jackals cry out across the desert, their voices eerie in the silence. The stars glitter above, endless and vast, the Milky Way stretching across the sky like a divine river. For a moment you feel small, insignificant, trapped between the desert and the heavens. You lie on your mat, body aching, eyes heavy, thoughts drifting not toward dreams of comfort, but toward prayers that tomorrow the Nile will flood enough, that tomorrow no sickness will strike, that tomorrow the gods will be merciful. Sleep is not peaceful, but filled with the weight of uncertainty. Think of the small punishments of everyday life. A child who disobeys is beaten quickly, without debate. A worker who falters under the overseer's gaze feels the sting of a whip. A farmer late in delivering grain to the storehouse faces harsh penalties, perhaps even prison. There is no softness, no leniency, no appeals. Life is lived under constant watch, not only of rulers but of gods. Eyes carved in statues stare down at you, symbols of eternal surveillance. The gods are everywhere, in the sun, the river, the desert, the crops, the animals. You cannot escape their gaze. Imagine living under the weight of never being alone, never having freedom even in your thoughts. Festivities around death, too, were exhausting. For the wealthy, death meant weeks of preparation, priests chanting, organs preserved, bodies wrapped endlessly in linen. For the poor, death was quick, a burial in the sand, sometimes without ceremony. Families mourned as best they could, but grief was muted by necessity. A family could not stop working because someone had died. The fields did not wait, the Nile did not wait, the overseers did not wait. Imagine trying to process loss while still grinding grain, carrying water, hauling stones. Grief becomes part of daily life, always present, never fully healed. Animals filled their world in ways we cannot imagine. Cats slink through homes, sacred yet also practical, killing snakes and mice. Dogs guard, herd and hunt. Donkeys carry loads until their legs give out. Cows, goats, sheep provide milk and meat, their cries constant in the background of daily life. Birds flutter overhead, caught in nets, eaten roasted. The buzzing of flies never ceases, the sting of mosquitoes is constant. Imagine life where animals are not distant or kept apart, but always near, their smells and sounds woven into your every breath. The desert itself was always close, stretching endlessly beyond the fertile strip of the Nile. Hot winds blew sand into eyes and mouths, coating skin, creeping into homes. Storms could rise suddenly, clouds of dust blotting out the sun, suffocating, relentless. Travelers who strayed too far without water perished quickly, their bodies left for the sun to bleach. The desert was both barrier and grave, a reminder of the fragility of life. Imagine standing on its edge, staring out into the endless sand, feeling both awe and terror, knowing that one wrong step, one wrong decision, and the desert would claim you. Dreams in such a world were simple. A farmer dreamed of a good flood, a scribe dreamed of promotion to a higher office, a craftsman dreamed of orders from the temple. Children dreamed of surviving to adulthood, women dreamed of surviving childbirth, men dreamed of living long enough to see their grandchildren. There were no dreams of adventure across seas, no dreams of invention, no dreams of change. Life was bound tightly by the walls of tradition, by the authority of priests and pharaohs, by the immovable cycles of nature. Imagine living without the possibility of reinventing yourself, without the chance to follow a passion, without the idea that your destiny could ever be more than what you were born into. And yet, in that monotony, there were small rebellions. A farmer might keep a little grain hidden before delivering the rest to the storehouse. A child might carve a figure of a god in the sand, mocking its form. A woman might whisper prayers not to the official gods, but to her own ancestors, seeking help in private ways. These quiet acts of resistance carried no armies, no revolutions, but they were sparks of human spirit refusing to be entirely extinguished. Imagine how small such acts feel, yet how necessary they are to endure a life so tightly bound. The seasons ruled everything. The flood, the planting, the harvest. These three phases were the only calendar most people needed. The flood meant fields submerged, fish abundant, but also work repairing damage. The planting meant bending for hours, sowing seeds in the mud, covered in mosquitoes. The harvest meant long days cutting grain, bundling, storing, sweating until nightfall. And then it began again, year after year, generation after generation. Imagine your life ruled not by weeks or months, not by personal schedules, but by the pulse of a river and the commands of nature. There is no holiday from this cycle, no escaping it, no changing it. You live inside it until you no longer live at all. If you imagine being wealthy, remember that wealth itself was fragile. A change in dynasty, a shift in favor, a whisper of treason, and fortunes were seized, titles stripped, lives ended. Nobles too lived under fear, their golden jewelry not shields but targets. Servants watched them, rivals plotted, priests whispered. No one was safe from the shifting sands of power. Imagine living with riches yet never with peace, sleeping in fine linen, but waking in fear that tomorrow the palace door will be broken down and you will be dragged away. All of this paints a picture not of the Egypt seen in books with glossy images of pyramids glowing under the sun, but of the Egypt lived by real people, where sweat, hunger, repetition, fear, and monotony were constant companions. And as you sit here listening, your body perhaps relaxing, your eyelids growing heavy, perhaps you can sense why such a life, for all its grandeur in history, would be unbearable for even a single day in reality. The endless rhythm, the heavy rituals, the lack of choice, the constant demands of survival, these are the truths buried beneath the golden masks, hidden in the silent stones, waiting in the dust of history to whisper their wariness into your ears until you too begin to drift into sleep.